TVN News. Get the whole story.
Well, a good afternoon from wherever it is that you're watching us from. We're right on time for KTN Africa Speaks. My name is Grace Nganga. Now, Haiti Prime Minister Ariel Henry announced his resignation Tuesday, the day after the United States pledged another $100 million to a United Nations-backed multinational security force intended to assist Haitian police in combating gangs, along with $33 million in humanitarian aid.
A political crisis and rising violence have created an untenable situation for the Haitian people. Haitian Prime Minister Ariel Henry has agreed to step down after a transitional authority is established that will govern the violence-plagued nation until new elections are held. The United States is urging him to expedite this transition. Amid the ongoing crisis that threatens Haiti's stability, the U.S. on Monday increased its commitment for the Caribbean country's security and humanitarian support.
The United States Department of Defense is doubling its approved support for the mission from $100 million to $200 million. And that brings the total U.S. support to $300 million for this effort. I'm also announcing additional humanitarian assistance for the people of Haiti, $33 million to further support their health and food security.
At the United Nations, diplomats hope the deployment of the UN-endorsed multinational security support mission to Haiti will help the country stop the violence. Some analysts believe the mission can create the security conditions necessary for upcoming elections.
Some of it is financial support to actually support this mission. The United States Southern Command is already on record as indicating that they are in process of providing planning assistance, information sharing and intelligence relating to the situation on the ground in Haiti.
Others are skeptical of foreign forces pouring into Haiti.
You've seen members of Haitian civil society who've come to testify before Congress that have said, we don't want additional forces in our country because forces have come in here, they've raped our women, they've spread disease, they've, collaborated with criminal elements.
The Caribbean community said the Transitional Council for Haiti would consist of 7 members representing political coalitions and the private sector, plus 2 non-voting civil society members. This council will appoint a new prime minister and initiate preparations for upcoming presidential elections.
Now, Turkey's new naval agreement with Somalia places the Turkish Navy in a strategically vital region, underlining Ankara's growing naval ambitions. However, analysts warn that the agreement threatens to escalate current tensions with Somalia's neighbor Ethiopia. Dorian Jones reports from Istanbul.
The Somali parliament ratified a 10-year defence agreement with Turkey this month. Under the deal, the Turkish Navy will help protect Somalia's territorial waters and facilitate the training and equipping of the Somali Navy. With Turkey already having a military base in Somalia, naval analysts say the deal is another step in projecting Turkish influence.
This will provide Turkey an opportunity to increase its influence in the Horn of Africa. Because all those external countries, Gulf countries, the Western countries, even Japan has a base in Djibouti. So they are all vying to increase their involvement in the region, especially for economic purposes. So this is an opportunity for Turkey as well.
The Somali naval deal comes as Ankara rapidly expands its navy to have a so-called blue water capabilities, or the ability to operate on the oceans far from the country's home ports.
It focuses on the projection of Turkish capacity, Turkish military capacity in the maritime domain. both in protecting its own EEZs, exclusive economic zones, waters, and also helping its allies, its partners, to do the same. And as you know, like Somalia, for example, has been fighting a increasing actually threat of like piracy.
Turkey's deepening military ties with Somalia come as the Horn of Africa nation faces ongoing tensions with its neighbour Ethiopia. But analysts say Ankara is well placed to contain any fallout, given its good ties with Ethiopia.
Military cooperation, personal cooperation, and personal relation between the leaders. I think its relations are pretty good. I mean, because in the region, everybody everybody looks for a sort of security cooperation, and it's same for Ethiopia. And Turkey is a security provider for Ethiopia as well.
With Turkish-made military drones being widely used by both Ethiopian and Somali militaries in their wars against insurgencies, Ankara has, until now, maintained good ties with both countries. But analysts warn Ankara needs to tread carefully given the region's volatility.
In the long run, this might lead to Turkey's involvement in regional conflicts. So this was what Turkey was trying to avoid in its Africa policy. It does not want to be a part of African conflicts, but it might be dragged into Africa's conflicts.
With Turkey's naval deal with Somalia, the latest step in projecting influence into one of the most volatile parts of the world, analysts say Ankara will need to continue to hone its diplomatic balancing skills.
Now, Russia has relaunched its spy operations against the West since its 2022 invasion of Ukraine. According to analysts, Henry Ridgwell has more from London.
Russian helicopter pilot Maxim Kuzminov defected to Ukraine in August 2023. He moved to Spain and started a new life under a false identity. Last month, Kuzminov's bullet-riddled body was found in a parking lot in southern Spain. Russia has not admitted to the killing, but the director of Moscow's Foreign Intelligence Service described Kuzminov as a moral corpse for defecting. Analysts say the killing is the latest example of how Russia's intelligence operations have been reinvigorated since Europe kicked out hundreds of suspected Kremlin spies in the wake of Russia's 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
The Europeans had a sense of security that the Russian spies are not there anymore, that their capabilities have been significantly curtailed. But the problem is they have not been. They are mightier than ever.
Russian state media last month published an intercepted phone call between senior German Air Force officers discussing supplying long-range Taurus missiles to Ukraine. Kyiv has warned that a whole network of Russian spies is operating in Germany. French intelligence services are investigating a Russia-backed campaign aimed at interfering in the June European elections. France warned last month that Europe is under informational attack from Russia.
They still invest, billions into intelligence operations in Europe, developing that capabilities which are designed for interference into election, radicalization of different social, ethnical, religious groups, including minorities, investing billions into political proxies, who can actually even come to power.
Analysts say Moscow is increasingly operating remotely, using non-Russian proxies to carry out its operations, including organized criminals and foreign nationals from political and business circles. Trials of suspected spies working for Russia are ongoing in Britain, Germany, Norway, Poland, and several other countries.
It's not any more ideological fight. It's not like communism fighting, capitalism, like Soviets would say. No, it's not. But it's that authoritarian countries, trying to subvert the West as a stronghold of democracy, freedom, and human rights. And this is, for them, existential fight.
Meanwhile, CIA Director William Burns wrote recently that disaffection with the war in Ukraine has in turn presented a once-in-a-generation opportunity for Western intelligence agencies to recruit Russian spies.
Now, critical funds to counter China in the Pacific are finally approved by 3 U.S. allies, Palau, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands over the weekend. U.S. President Joe Biden signed into law $7 billion US dollars over 20 years in funding for the Compact to a Free Association as part of a partial government funding bill. VOA's Jessica Stone reports.
The yeas are 75, the nays are 22. The motion is agreed to.
With this vote in the U.S. Senate, partial funding flows to the U.S. government. For the tiny Pacific nation of Palau, a U.S. ally, it's a lifeline.
It's not October 1st, but it's at least within this fiscal year and really just in time.
Palau maintains diplomatic relations with Taiwan, but its economy relies on Chinese tourists, who dropped by more than 50% in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, tanking the nation's economy. Whip says he recently met with investors from Singapore and Japan to chart a more sustainable direction.
Opening up new markets so that we're diversified and more resilient and not so dependent on the Chinese tourism, which could be weaponized.
Palau's funds come through an agreement that provides $7 billion in economic aid over 20 years to Palau, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands. In exchange, the U.S. gets exclusive access to a broad swath of the Pacific and the right to turn others away, including China.
Simply having the freedom of navigation through this area of the Pacific is really critical. And if we lose that, we also lose direct access to our allies in the Philippines and Australia.
The agreement was renewed and signed last fall, but Congress took 5 months to fund it. The delay raised doubts about Washington's commitment to the Pacific, warned Marshall Islands President Hilda Hine.
Our nation has been a steadfast ally of the United States, but that should not be taken for granted.
In a video message on Facebook, Wesley Simina, president of the Federated States of Micronesia, or FSM, acknowledged the long wait.
This understandably may have stirred doubt and uncertainty. But in this, you can be certain. At the end of the day, the FSM and the U.S. reached an agreement on an outcome that I am confident will benefit both our nations.
It's an agreement, these leaders say, that provides new motivation to deepen economic and security cooperation in a part of the world that's critical to American security.
Right, now we're going to take a very short commercial break here on Africa Speaks, but please stay with us for more.
KTN News. Get the whole story.
My name is Joshua Igara, the Chief Executive of Stanbic Bank in Kenya and South Sudan. Catch me on the trading bell as I speak about our results for last year, what we see in the medium term for organizations, and many more stories about organizations and in Kenya. Thank you very much.
Mimi ni Ahmad Muhammad Athman, imamu wa msikiti wa Landis hapa Nairobi. Ramadhan ni mwezi wa 9 katika kalenda ya Kiislamu, na mwezi huu Waislamu wanakuwa ni wenye kufunga kuanzia asubuhi mpaka magharibi jioni. Lengo na makusudio ni kupata msamaha na kufuata amri ya Mwenyezi Mungu katika Qur'ani takatifu.
This February, tunakupenda daily on Star Times,
where you make me the happiest man on earth.
Me, of course, me napenda kijana. I like you, bro.
Renew your subscription today. Star Times. Enjoy digital.
KTN News. Get the whole story.
Welcome back. This is Africa Speaks. Now, according to the Hamas-affiliated Ministry of Health, more than 13,400 children have been killed in Gaza since the war with Israel began on October 7th. The education system has been nearly frozen, and Palestinian officials worry about the long-term effects of the war on Gaza's children.
Palestinian officials say one child in Gaza is killed every 15 minutes. More than 13,000 Palestinian children have been killed in Gaza since the war between Israel and Hamas began in October, according to Gaza's health ministry. At least 25,000 have been wounded. Most of the 1 million Palestinian children haven't been to school in Gaza, and there's little prospect that classes will resume anytime soon. Most of the schools have been transformed into crowded shelters for the roughly 2 million Palestinians who have been displaced by Israeli military strikes.
Since the right to life is not guaranteed anymore in Gaza, of course, right to education is even not exist because many reasons. First of all, most of the schools in Gaza now they became kind of shelter for the civilians, even though they've been targeted by the Israeli army.
Half of the 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza are under the age of 18. Palestinian officials say hundreds of thousands of these youth are suffering from the effects of the war and displacement from their homes. They say that schools could supply a routine and normality.
In the past 5 months, we have seen many children suffering from emotional distress and psychosocial problems. The fact that there is no school is just making things worse.
Al-Khadour says even after the war ends, it will take months before children can return to school. Dozens of schools run by the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, have been destroyed, and hundreds of teachers have been killed or wounded. Today, a few makeshift classes have been set up in the southern city of Rafah, which hosts almost half of Gaza's displaced population.
We escaped the bombings and escaped from under the rubble. Here, a teacher comes every day to teach children, bring joy to them, and find a way to keep them entertained.
But aid groups in Gaza say they are less concerned these days about the education of children than they are about an impending famine. The United States says Israel must do more to allow humanitarian food aid distribution in Gaza and has announced plans to build a floating pier for food deliveries by sea.
Now, Taiwan-ruled Kinmen is an island only a few kilometers from China. It has been the first line of defense against China for Taiwan's government. One blacksmith in Kinmen, made famous by what he recycles, is trying to turn objects of the island's violent past into a symbol of peace.
In the middle of the heat and noise, Wu Zhendong turns what is trash into tools.
The materials we use are mostly the spent artillery shells from the past.
In the past, Kinmen Island was a battleground. and resources were scarce for residents. Growing up, Wu says artillery shells fired back and forth between China and Taiwan were a part of everyday life here.
Sometimes you'll find artillery shells when walking out in the fields. Sometimes when digging at a construction site, they'll dig up shells.
These are the remnants of the Chinese Civil War.
Since 1949, the KMT military came to Kinmen. This also became the base for the KMT military to retake mainland China.
1949 was also the year Mao Zedong established the communist-ruled People's Republic of China. The defeated Kuomintang, or KMT government, retreated to Taiwan and called it the Republic of China. Since then, in KMT-ruled Kinmen, on and off conflict continued with artillery fire until the 1970s. That included a month and a half of shelling that started on August 23, 1958. Hundreds of thousands of shells hit Kinmen. When that ended, the communists and KMT agreed to shell each other on alternate days. With an ample supply of raw material, these shells take on a new life in Wu's hands.
We are making something useful out of waste, making household tools and knives.
Wu has been making knives for 50 years. In that time, he has seen China change. It's most obvious at night.
Going back and forth in these 30 years, China keeps improving. When we go there compared to going to Taipei, it's hard to tell that it's a communist country. Their cities, architecture is completely different from the way we used to imagine how China would be.
Many Kinmen residents hope as China progresses, there would be more common ground between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait, even as the ideologies of communist China and democratically ruled Taiwan differ.
We only hope both sides of the strait can use a gentle and a peaceful approach toward each other, instead of one of opposition.
The scars of battles are still visible in Kinmen, even as Kinmen residents hope for peace if the island becomes a battlefield again.
We're used to it. If we were afraid, we would have all fled to Taiwan during the August 23 artillery shelling.
For his part, Wu hopes by transforming what was something destructive into knives, he can cut off Kinmen's violent past as he hopes for enduring peace for Kinmen.
Now, tensions between Taipei and Beijing have been heating up in the waters around Taiwan-controlled Kinmen Islands. Residents have endured artillery barrages in the past and persistent military threats. Even so, many say they doubt conflict will reach their shore.
A piece of military history on display. A reminder of the Kinmen Islands' violent past. Kinmen native Honor Ni remembers his childhood vividly.
My house was hit by artillery shells.
Kinmen is a front line in the conflict between communist China and democratically ruled Taiwan. The islands are just a few kilometers from China's southern coastal city of Xiamen and about an hour's flight from Taiwan.
Because of geography, we're almost one with China's Xiamen. We're very close physically, so of course we have a more Chinese way of thinking and affection toward China.
Most residents identify themselves as Kinmenese or Chinese, not Taiwanese. That includes Ni, who served in the army for the Kuomintang or KMT, China's former ruling government.
In the 5,000 years of Chinese history, dynasties have changed too many times. That's not important. What's important is that we need to return to our roots.
On August 23, 1958, when Ni was 3 years old, communist forces started bombarding Kinmen with intense artillery fire, and KMT forces on the island returned fire.
The artillery fire came suddenly, so people who lived in the hills would dig holes in the ground and hide in them.
What's now known as the 823 Artillery War continued for 44 days. After the bombardment ended, the communist government and the KMT agreed to shell each other on alternate days. That lasted 20 years.
When I was young, I would hide in a bomb shelter, light a candle, and eat dinner at night.
The shelling ended when the U.S. switched diplomatic recognition from the government in Taiwan to that of communist China. Now tourists replace KMT troops inside military bunkers. Most Kinmen residents still support the KMT. Ouyang Zhengyi is one of the few exceptions. While he considers himself Kinmenese, he voted for the incoming president Lai Ching-te of Taiwan's ruling Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP.
He's more reliable and also more trustworthy.
Most DPP supporters identify as Taiwanese and want to distance themselves from China. But KMT supporters want closer ties. Chinese leader Xi Jinping in his 2024 New Year's speech said Taiwan and China will surely be reunified. Many in Kinmen say they want unification, but they define it differently.
I want to emphasize when I say unification, I don't mean for Taiwan to be unified with communist China. It would be them being unified with us. It could take 50 years or 100 years, and if we communicate, there won't be a fight.
Many residents say if China attacks Taiwan, Kinmen will be the safest spot.
Kinmen citizens are not worried about the safety issue at all, because our roots come from over there.
With such feelings of kinship common on the islands, residents say they don't believe China would attack a member of the family.
In Alaska are developing a cloud-based approach to storing and analyzing data about volcanoes in hopes of increasing the speed with which they can predict eruptions. Phil Draken has more.
When a long-dormant volcano in Alaska started showing new signs of activity last year, scientists used new technologies to quickly analyze large amounts of data.
Nobody knew what was going on, and we were able within a couple of days to do an analysis of almost 8 years of data that would previously have taken weeks to months.
This new technology allowed the Alaska Volcano Observatory to conclude more quickly that the unusual activity at Mount Edgecombe did not pose an immediate risk. But they have installed new seismic instruments on the mountain to better monitor its activity. Most volcano observation uses satellites to measure how the ground around volcanoes is moving. That data is then transferred to local servers and downloaded for analysis. But those large files can take a long time to download and analyze. The new system allows volcano observers to store and analyze that data in the cloud. This saves time in transporting the data and provides faster volcano updates with better computer modeling to improve eruption prediction. That's especially important in Alaska, says geophysicist Max Enders.
I think in a lot of ways, we're almost always at the forefront of a lot of this technology. We have a lot of active volcanoes that are erupting quite frequently that we have to monitor, and people worldwide will come to Alaska to study volcanoes because there's so much opportunity to study active volcanoes here.
The Alaska Volcano Observatory originally developed its cloud-based system to better handle both the growing amount of data it was receiving from improved technology and new partnerships with other observatories and space agencies. Automating the processing of volcanic data makes everyone safer, says geophysicist Michael Poland.
That's getting us towards this vision of sort of an international, global, virtual observatory that's capable of serving out data and analyzing results sort of in an automated and real-time basis. And that's going to really level the playing field.
Innovation in volcano observation doesn't stop with cloud-based technology, says Poland. Artificial intelligence will soon play an increasingly important role.
In the last few decades, we went from being very data poor to being pretty data rich. We need to develop new approaches for having kind of automated alarms, look at the data for us and pull out anything that the alarm system might think, something's funny here. Some of the groups in the UK have deployed it on some of these data sets, and they have identified anomalous deformation in some of these images. So they may have an archive of 10,000 images, and in that 10,000, they identified 100 that were worthy of closer look. It's a lot easier to look at 100 and throw out 50 and find 50 that are showing you something than it is to look at, 100,000 images.
And scientists hope that with faster analysis, they can produce earlier and more accurate warnings for people to evacuate when a volcano is about to blow its top.
Now, Ukrainian frontline forces are suffering from a worrying shortage of ammunition. Repeated delays in aid from Western allies has drastically reduced the number of Ukrainian artillery attacks against Russian positions. Jan Bochat reports from Ukraine's Donbas region.
The thunderous roar of cannons has become increasingly sporadic here at this Ukrainian artillery position in Donbas. Just a year ago, these soldiers would unleash their artillery at least 40 times a day. Now, that frequency has dwindled tenfold, and on some days, the guns remain silent. Across the front lines, a similar scenario is unfolding. With persistent delays in aid from Western allies, especially the United States, Ukrainians find themselves grappling with a frightening shortage of ammunition. This soldier goes by the nom de guerre Little Boy.
Now there are fewer shells, many fewer than before. Depending on how they move, mostly we shoot only against tanks, armored vehicles. The mortar teams are the ones targeting Russian soldiers.
In the Crimea forest, another front line in Donbas, soldiers received orders to engage a group of Russian troops rotating from the trenches. Maneuvering the cumbersome artillery piece into position, they soon received countermanding orders. Conserving shells became the priority. As ammunition grows scarce, Ukrainian soldiers find themselves increasingly confined to their bunkers. They say the permanent threat of drones and the abundance of enemy ammunition makes it too dangerous to venture outside. Most of the soldiers in this bunker have been on the front lines since the war began, with scant respite. Many have seen their families just twice during this time. They spend the majority of their days in small, dark, closed bunkers awaiting orders to fire.
It's a moral struggle. Being away from your family for so long is tough, but we have no choice. We've endured occupation. We know its toll.
Belarusian has spent a mere 20 days in the past 2 years with his family, a daughter, a son, and 2 grandsons. He says he is tired, just like many in the front lines. Ukraine recognizes its soldiers are exhausted and now is preparing a controversial bill to draft 500,000 more soldiers into the war. Until reinforcements arrive, moments of happiness may be as simple as gathering in the bunker, frying pork belly on a quiet day in this war.
Well, and that is where we wrap up Africa Speaks this Wednesday. Thank you so much for always keeping me company. My name is Grace Nganga.